Take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
CannabisRadio.com presents The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Hey, this is great, man.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-token lovers of liberty. It is Tuesday, March 29th, 2016, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us for another great show, coming to you live from Boulder City, Nevada, overlooking Lake Mead, which is much lower than the last time I saw Lake Mead. We're running out of water out here in the desert. It's a damn shame, but we're doing okay here in Boulder City. We went out to Las Vegas last night, visited the Las Vegas Strip. You might have seen some of my photos on Instagram at Radical Russ, and had a really, really good time out there. Great time to see the lights, and I got to see my first Cirque du Soleil show last night, the Michael Jackson 1. And it was phenomenal. Definitely the top-notch, world-class entertainment you come to expect from Las Vegas. Nice to get that opportunity. I want to thank the folks that made that possible for me. I don't get a lot of time to really let what's left of my hair down and play, so very much appreciated. All work and no play makes Russ a dull boy. On today's show, we've got some great information for you, especially if you're interested in activism, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, because joining us at 5:30, we've got Adam Eidinger. He's with the D.C. Cannabis Initiative. They passed legalization in 2014, the grow and give style. And Adam's been a long-time activist there in D.C., in hemp and many other aspects of the cannabis plant and its reform. So we'll talk to him at 5:30 and get the details on this rally to call on President Obama to use his executive powers to deschedule cannabis, take it out of the Controlled Substances Act. So that's coming up at 5:30 in our activist agenda. Also on the show today, we'll have time for a radical rant. And in the rant today, there's a big piece out on International Business Times talking about the UN General Assembly special session on drugs and asking the question whether marijuana reformers will eventually become drug reformers as we continue to change the laws regarding marijuana. We're going to take a look at the different aspects of marijuana law reform versus drug law reform and how some of the frames we use with marijuana could harm us if we do want to transition into becoming drug law reformers. So that's coming up in the Radical Rant at the end of the show. Also coming up on the show today in Drug War Data Mining, we take a look at a subject that I've covered many times on the show, but we're going to cover it again, and that is drug testing for welfare. West Virginia is about to become the latest state to institute this horrendous practice, and a very brave West Virginia lawmaker took to the airwaves in West Virginia to discuss what a failure these policies have been everywhere they've been tried. So we'll take a look at those facts and figures in the Drug War Data Mines. That comes after Behind the Headlines, where Gary Johnson, Libertarian candidate for president, is predicting that President Obama will reclassify marijuana on his way out of office, as Adam Eidinger and the rest of us would like to see happen. So we'll take a look at that story and other predictions from the Libertarian candidate for president. And that all comes right after the Cannabis Radio News. And in the headlines today, the Oregon Health Authority has reversed itself on a controversial rule regarding marijuana extracts. We've got some problems with medical marijuana bill in Pennsylvania to talk about. In Hawaii, lawmakers are looking at a standard for stoned driving. Leon County, Florida might join other counties in decriminalizing marijuana. The Denver 420 rally is on. We'll tell you how you can get information about it. And Hustler's Larry Flint is getting into the marijuana business. It's all coming up on the Russ Belville Show.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Great websites today need expert web design and development and need to be e-commerce ready and mobile friendly. But building a marketable and profitable website can be an uphill climb. Ready to make your new website or replace your existing website? Think Orange as the new way to get in the black. Orange Hill Development works with Fortune 500 companies and offer the same top quality development service at a fraction of what other providers charge. Brands like Absolute, Carlsberg, and Nestea trust Orange Hill Development. Find out why you should trust your website with Orange Hill. Contact Orange Hill for a consultation today at orangehilldevelopment.com.
Being green is good. Growing green is good. Making green is great. CannabisRadio.com.
Are you playing an acoustic guitar but want to be louder without an amp? Try a resonator guitar. The fingerboard extension has National Resophonic and other resonators, square necks and round necks. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com. Go wild hog in the woods.
The Russ Belville Show, where the truth about marijuana gets more than a minute to speak.
Tommy Chong Show on Cannabis Radio. You know, about this podcast, what I really want to do from now on is to solve world problems. I feel like my job is to calm everybody down and focus on how we can save this planet.
The Tommy Chong Podcast, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome to my world.
It's time for the Cannabis Radio News, covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Cannabis Radio News is now available exclusively at CannabisRadio.com. Now your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. This is Cannabis Radio News.
This is your Cannabis Radio News for Tuesday, March 29th, 2016. The Oregon Health Authority has reversed itself on a controversial new rule that temporarily outlawed marijuana extracts on dispensary store shelves. The previous rule declared that starting April 1st, the state's medical marijuana dispensaries could not accept extracts produced by unlicensed processors. The state's extract industry cried foul as the licensing process would not begin until April 1st, and no business would have a license until months later. Producing cannabis extracts without a license is a felony under new laws signed by Governor Kate Brown this month. Under the new compromise, medical marijuana dispensaries will be able to accept extracts from producers who have applied for a license and submitted a $4,000 fee. Dispensaries will also still be allowed to sell the extracts they had already purchased from producers before April 1st. Unintended consequences and technical glitches are hampering the effort to reconcile Senate and House versions of a medical marijuana bill in Pennsylvania. Senate Bill 3 passed the House on March 16th on a 149-43 vote, but House lawmakers made changes to the version the Senate had passed 43-7 back in 2014. Now the Senate must decide whether to pass the bill as is to the governor or make changes that would then need House approval. One issue concerns the use of medical marijuana as a term in the House version versus medical cannabis in the Senate version. Another sticking point is the requirement of six-figure deposits in banking institutions for those applying for cannabis business licenses. Banks are still leery of accepting deposits from cannabis businesses due to federal prohibition. Hawaii lawmakers are asking how much marijuana a driver can safely consume before getting behind the wheel of a car. It's an issue they want to tackle now that Hawaii is setting up medical marijuana dispensaries. So Representative Cindy Evans and 15 other lawmakers introduced a resolution asking the State Department of Health to study whether a person can safely drive while under the influence. Hawaii law bans people from driving under the influence of a drug that impairs their ability to drive, but there isn't a set threshold for how much marijuana, medically prescribed or not, is acceptable in the bloodstream. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, Colorado, Montana, and Washington set the limit at 5 nanograms per milliliter of blood, while Nevada and Ohio went with the lower 2 nanograms. Other states provide an exemption for medical marijuana patients. Leon County may be the next locality in Florida to adopt marijuana decriminalization if a county commissioner's proposal is successful. Commissioner Bill Proctor is calling for an ordinance to reduce pot possession in the county to a civil infraction like a traffic ticket. Under his proposal, possession of less than 20 grams of marijuana would be subject only to a civil citation and fine under the county code. Possession of 20 grams or less of marijuana is a misdemeanor under Florida state law, and over 20 grams is a felony, resulting in lifetime loss of the right to vote. Leon County would join Palm Beach County, Volusia County, Miami-Dade County, and a handful of cities such as Tampa in ending arrests and criminal records for personal marijuana possession. The Denver 420 rally is on, but will be held on the Saturday before 420, which falls on a Wednesday this year. On Saturday, April 16th, Wiz Khalifa and Lil Wayne will headline a free concert in Denver's Civic Center Park. The event is sponsored by Colorado Marijuana Company, Massroots, and Sweetleaf, and should bring 100,000 people to the park. There will be 250 vendors, and while the event is free, attendees are encouraged to support the event by donating to the cause or upgrading to Premier or All Access passes, which can be found online at 420rally.co. Hustler magazine publisher Larry Flynt, whose Supreme Court case against the Reverend Jerry Falwell secured the broad right to satirize public figures, is investing in the legal pot business, saying, quote, "Pharmaceutical companies don't want people turning to pot for pain relief because it means they'll be spending less on prescription pills," Flynt wrote in a statement. The alcohol industry doesn't want the competition either. The mounting scientific evidence that pot is safer than alcohol, legal marijuana would clearly put a major dent in the booze business's profits. Private for-profit prisons only make money if they're full, and that means locking up weed growers and pot smokers, end quote. This has been your Cannabis Radio News for Tuesday, March 29th, 2016. I'm Russ Belville.
Cannabis Confidential with Dr. Dina. Candid.
I want to give you the inside story.
Captivating.
I want to introduce you to my kind and amazingly talented friends.
Compelling.
We get to meet some of the most amazing cannabis activists and warriors around.
Listen in as medical marijuana pioneer Dr. Dina shares never-before-heard stories, chats with cannabis insiders and celebrity friends, and provides invaluable perspective and insight into one of the fastest-growing industries in the world.
I want to share with you what was once confidential information. Let's expose the truth, discuss the issues, and learn the facts.
Cannabis Confidential, only on CannabisRadio.com.
The Russ Belville Show reminds you to never smoke and drive impaired. Hang out for a while and share.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor-intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
Cannabis use isn't the only thing growing, so are we. Grow with us. CannabisRadio.com.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
The world of cannabis is evolving at a frenetic pace. The Russ Belville Show gets behind the headlines to take a deeper look at breaking news in our Cannabis Focus.
Today in the Cannabis Focus, we take a look at Libertarian White House candidate Gary Johnson running for president, and I guess this is the third time. I knew he was running in 2012. In fact, he was following me all around the country for a while. I did about 5 events in a row where I was there with Governor Gary Johnson, to the point, one event in Texas, he actually pulled up in a parking spot next to me at the event. I'm like, my God, I'm being stalked by the former governor of New Mexico. But great guy, Governor Gary Johnson. And while I disagree with him on some aspects of policy, I can definitely give my endorsement of him as a principled man, as an honest man who's consistent in his beliefs. And I'll tell you, these days in politics, that might be enough to get my vote. Just someone who, even when I disagree with him, I can understand why that he's not being bought off by someone, that he's come to it from a very principled and rational, logical point of view. Well, Gary Johnson was interviewed by the Washington Times, which is notably a conservative paper, and he believes that President Obama is going to remove cannabis from the Schedule I list of controlled substances on his way out of office, perhaps in the lame duck period after the election, but before the inauguration of the next president. Johnson says, quote, "It's going to be just like alcohol. I'm going to predict that Obama, when he leaves office, is going to deschedule marijuana as a Class 1 narcotic. I wish he would have done that to this point, but I think he's going to do that going out the door. That's a positive," end quote. For those who don't know, of course, marijuana, Schedule I drug, it's on the same category as LSD and heroin. No currently accepted medical use, no safe profile of use, and a high potential for abuse. Obviously untrue about marijuana in a country where 23 states have medical use and the government has numerous patents on the medical use of cannabis. The current presidential candidates, aside from Gary Johnson, include Democratic Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She has called for a rescheduling of cannabis as Schedule II. That includes drugs like oxycodone, cocaine, and methamphetamines, which can be prescribed in all 50 states. Not always, but there's a drug called Desoxyn that's often prescribed to kids with ADHD. That is pharmaceutical methamphetamine. There's really no pharmacological difference between the two drugs. So we have, and in dental and nasal surgeries, there is pharmaceutical cocaine as an anesthetic. So these drugs are Schedule II, but if you're caught with one of them without a prescription, you're still pretty darn busted. You're as bad as or worse as if you'd had a bag of weed. So obviously Schedule II is not much of a move from the perspective of a cannabis consumer. From the perspective of a cannabis researcher, it's a huge deal in that Schedule II opens up the possibility for researchers to acquire cannabis and do legitimate double-blind studies on it. And it does open things up from the medical use of cannabis in that states, should they allow medical use, could then allow it with prescription. But I think we need to be careful of this Schedule II as a potential trap. Once we open up marijuana to Schedule II, it's now subject to all of the prescription rules that you find for any DEA Schedule II drug. So in a state like California or Oregon, where the medical marijuana recommendations are happening, they're not prescriptions, they're recommendations, it's a free speech thing, would that actually be a more liberal policy than having to adhere to the prescription regulations of Schedule II drugs? In those cases, for example, Schedule II oxycodone, you can't just get refills for it. You have to get that prescription re-upped time after time after time. Could that be the same circumstance we'd find with cannabis under a Schedule II regime? So Hillary Clinton's calling for that. Bernie Sanders is calling for, like Gary Johnson, removing it from the federal schedule altogether. Now, removing it from the schedule doesn't mean it's automatically legal in all 50 states. Every state has their own laws and their own drug schedules regarding marijuana. So taking it out of the federal drug schedule would just default all the states to their state schedule. And in many cases, the state schedule just copies the federal schedule. So, they already have marijuana as a Schedule I drug in that state. But this would free the states up, and this is, again, consistent with Gary Johnson's libertarian view of states' rights, would free the states up to regulate cannabis any way they see fit. And that would be a fairly good 10th Amendment reading. There is nothing in the Constitution that's giving the federal government the control over agriculture or medicines. So it does make sense from that point of view. On the Republican side, most of the Republicans are issuing mealy-mouthed states' rights sentiments that they're fine with Washington or Colorado doing what they want to do, but they wouldn't do it in their own states. We've heard this from Donald Trump, from Rafael Eduardo Cruz, Ted Cruz, and John Kasich. These are the least that anyone can do with respect to marijuana, and in that case, these Republicans have pretty much the same view as Democratic President Obama, who has just let marijuana legalization happen without federal interference.
Oh, Piggy can run.
Well, folks, it's 4:20 in the Mountain Time Zone. Happy 4:20 to my friends out there in Denver, Colorado, getting ready for the big Denver rally. Remember, that website address is 420rally.co if you're interested in being in the Denver area to celebrate freedom on 420. 420rally.co to get your tickets, make your donations. I'll be in New York at the Ungas.
Ganjapreneur.com, your guide to the cannabis business world. Ganjapreneur.com is a comprehensive resource for cannabis professionals and entrepreneurs. Download the Ganjapreneur app on your smartphone or tablet to catch up on cannabis industry news, scroll through our daily job listings, and learn about successful cannabis companies, executives, and investors. Ganjapreneur.com, helping Ganjapreneurs grow.
We don't limit how much you smoke, and we don't limit where you listen. Cannabis Radio is now on iTunes, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio.
Are you playing an acoustic guitar but want to be louder without an amp? Try a resonator guitar. The fingerboard extension has National Resophonic and other resonators, square necks and round necks. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com. Go wild hog in the woods.
You're listening to Radical Russ on the Russ Belville Show.
Doc Rob, the concierge for better living.
Cannabis is just one of the many great plants that we have on this planet called Earth that we can use consciously and intelligently to improve our well-being.
Take a real, raw, inside look at healthier living while sharing great ideas and improvements for a better quality of life.
Learning to live and live well is a lifelong process. This is a journey. You could be 80 years old or 8 years old. You can still learn something that's going to make tomorrow a little bit healthier, a little bit easier, a little bit happier, a little bit better.
The concierge for better living with Doc Rob. Only on CannabisRadio.com.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Today in the Drug War Data Mines, we take a look at the state of West Virginia, and we salute one lawmaker there, Wayne County Delegate Don Perdue. And I don't know if he's a Democrat or a Republican, because in the copy on the news site, WV Metro News, in the copy it says R. Wayne, like Republican from Wayne, and in the caption on his picture it says D. Wayne. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he's Republican or Democrat, but you know what? It doesn't matter because he's doing the right thing, and that is standing up to oppose with facts, science, reason, and logic this new bill signed into law by Governor Earl Ray Tomblin in West Virginia, Senate Bill 6, which is another one of these odious drug testing for welfare bills. This is a 3-year pilot program, so they suppose that it will go away in 3 years. Yeah, we'll see. That is to screen recipients of temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, otherwise known as welfare. Now, this is a practice that is based in moralizing and infantilizing the poor. The whole idea here is, well, and as said by some of the people in support of it, Senator Craig Blair said, quote, We've got to stop the cycle of drug addiction and the abuses that go along with it, end quote. And why is it that we need to stop the cycle of drug addiction so desperately for people who happen to be poor, but it's not necessary to go to these great lengths to do it for anyone who's middle class or rich, right? Any of the other recipients of government grants, county grants, state grants in West Virginia don't necessarily have to have drug testing, but the poor people, they absolutely have to be tested for their use of mind-altering substances because, well, they're poor, and, we can't trust the poor people to be able to do what's right, and this is the attitude that we hear from so many of these lawmakers. But this delegate, again, Delegate Perdue, has come forth on the local news to talk about this and shown how, quote, in the states where they've done that, drug testing for welfare, they have not had the effects they expected to have. So they have not proven to be productive. And what's going on here is the state comes up with a series of suspicions that they can cite to indicate whether or not there's a reasonable cause to drug test someone who's applying for welfare. The reason they have to do that is because Florida and Michigan tried this with everybody who applies for welfare. Everybody. Just by basis of you being poor and needing help, we suspect you're a drug addict and you've got to piss in a cup to prove that you're not. And what they found, statistically speaking, was that only about 2.2% of the people failed those drug tests when they were testing everybody. And the general workforce out there, the people not on welfare, fail at about 8%. So they're about 1/4 as likely, if you were applying for welfare, to fail the drug test. Now, why is that? Well, guess what? Drugs cost money. When you're poor, you can't afford drugs. This idea that people that use marijuana and folks, let's be clear, we're mostly talking about marijuana here because that's the one that stays in people's systems for so long. You can do your heroin, your coke, your meth, your alcohol on the weekend, and by Monday, you're going to test clean. Smoke a joint on the weekend, you're going to test dirty for a week or two. So obviously, we're mostly catching pot smokers with this. So this idea that pot smokers are so in the grips of the addiction that they're going to forego feeding their kids or buying their kids new shoes instead to get a bag is just not borne out by the facts. It's just moralizing and infantilizing the poor, this idea that we've got to do what's best for them. But in those states, it was declared unconstitutional. The judges that reviewed these laws said, well, wait a minute, even though you're poor, you still got a Fourth Amendment. The Constitution still applies to you even if you don't have a big bank account, and you can't just search and seize people for no valid reason. That's what's caused these latest states like West Virginia to come up with valid reasons. Here's some of the valid reasons. If you're applying for welfare, here's some of the reasons in West Virginia that could get you popped for the test. A caseworker determines, based on the result of the drug screen, that the applicant demonstrates qualities indicative of substance abuse based on the indicators of the drug screen. In other words, if you failed a P-test before, then we may need to P-test you again. Or if an applicant has been convicted of a drug-related offense within the past 3 years before applying for welfare. So if you got busted for a joint 2.5 years ago and then you lost your job a year ago and now you're facing homelessness and need some welfare, guess what? That joint from 2.5 years ago means no dice. Now, the other thing that's terrible about these programs is even if you bought the idea that we're going to try to help people and try to get them out of addiction, the figures that you spend on paying for drug tests for all the people to only get 2% of them to fail, and then withholding the benefits from just those few people who do fail, it actually costs you more to institute the tests than if you'd have just given the welfare to the people in the first place. So you're actually losing. It's a losing money proposition when you institute these drug testing for welfare laws. And again, let's just understand, because there's a lot of people out there that listen to these kind of rants of mine and they say, well, Russ, I have to P-test for my job. If I have to P-test for my job to pay for their welfare, my God, they should have to test for it too. Folks, the solution to your oppression is not the oppression of people weaker than you. The question you should be asking yourself is, why do I have to P-test to get a job in the first place? And if we ended some of those P-tests for jobs, A lot of people wouldn't lose their jobs and need welfare. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to have Adam Eidinger on the phone from the DC Marijuana Expo. That's coming up next on the Russ Belville Show. Stay tuned.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Ignite the conversation on some trending topics along the Cannabis Radio social media network. Join our crew of thousands on our Cannabis Radio page on Facebook or at Canna Radio, CANNA Radio on Twitter. Plus, look for our Facebook and Google Plus pages for all of our original programs and connect with Dr. Dina, Kyle Cushman, Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Nurse Heather, Doc Rob, the hosts of Ganjapreneur, and more. Connect with the growing Cannabis Radio social crusade at Canna Radio on Twitter or search for Cannabis Radio on Facebook, Google Plus, and Instagram and grow with us.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere. Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, SoundCloud, Snapchat, LinkedIn, and Boise State University's 2400 baud modem bulletin board system from 1985.
It's time for Cannabis Facts about Alzheimer's from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A new Florida study in the journal Molecular and Cellular Neuroscience found that cannabis promotes the growth of healthy new brain tissue. It can slow the effects of Alzheimer's and may in fact be able to halt it entirely. A long-term study by Ohio State University's Professor Gary Wenk concludes that people who regularly use marijuana get Alzheimer's at a much lower rate than others. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
Maui Wowie, Acapulco Gold, California Kush. Our strains stretch everywhere too. This is the Cannabis Radio Network.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
Activism begins with ACT. The Russ Belville Show features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists working for an end to prohibition in today's activist agenda.
Welcome back, everybody. 32 after the hour, and joining us today from Washington, D.C. for our activist agenda, we have Adam Eidinger on the line. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
We're so glad to have you. We've been following what you've been doing out there in Washington, D.C. We covered, of course, the Initiative 71 campaign and your success in getting the Grow and Give initiative passed. So thank you for all your activism, first of all.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, it's an amazing group of activists in the city right now. There's quite a scene here.
Well, let's talk about the event that's happening, and then we'll talk about Washington, D.C. a little more in general. You've got this smokeout rally that's planned for this Saturday, April 2nd. Give people the details on that and why you're putting this rally together.
It's called Reschedule 420, and so we're not having our normal 420 celebration in Washington, D.C., which, in the past there have been smoke-ins on the National Mall. We're moving it to 4-2, because Obama has been a big zero on rescheduling or descheduling cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act. And we want him to start meeting with national marijuana organizations. We want him to not just do things without any consultation. He needs to welcome the cannabis reformers into the White House before the election if he expects any of the Democrats like myself to show up in the election, if he expects people in the Black Lives Matter movement to not start pointing the finger at him, because there have been 5 million people arrested now, over 5 million since he became president, for marijuana. We want rights in all 50 states, and, Bill Maher really kicked us in the butt. I took it personally when he said that, folks, it's not legal yet. And I realized he's right. We legalized it here. We have an amazing home grow situation in the nation's capital for residents. But people who come here, who visit the Capitol, they're still sneaking around in alleyways. They have nowhere to legally use it. They can't legally, really obtain it. And then they should be able, when you leave your home state and you travel across this great country, you should be able to take cannabis with you without fear of arrest. And that's why I think, it's time. It's time for federal legalization. And this protest is a smoke-in, but it's going to be a very thoughtful act of civil disobedience at 4:20 p.m. on Saturday. And we've sent a letter to the president. We've said, he's never responded to any of our letters as an organization in the nation's capital. It's really pathetic. And, he got 90% of the vote here. He's very popular in Washington, D.C. locally. But it's also across this country that people in the left wing are sort of expecting reform, and we're not getting it. So it's time to protest. It's time to remind them that you can't look good on this issue unless you do something.
The protest is this April 2nd, Saturday at 4:20. Where do people need to meet for the protest?
Well, it begins at 1:45, just off of at 15th and Pennsylvania, just a block away from the White House, where we're going to be assembling a 51-foot-long joint. And this is a huge work of art that's been developed for this protest. And we're going to carry this joint together over our heads. There's a graphic on our website, dcmj.org, that you can see that explains it. And it says on this joint, Obama deschedule cannabis now. And we'll have a series of speakers for about 2 hours, ranging from veterans' voices, patient voices, people that have been to jail. The Black Lives Matter movement is mobilizing. We have a diverse community here that cares about this issue, and they're all going to be heard from. And even an open mic at one point is scheduled for it. And then at 4:20, Ann Armstrong from the Healing Church of Rhode Island, which gives away marijuana as a sacrament to help the healing and sick, and is recognized as a 501c3 tax-exempt religious organization, will lead a smoke-in. And regardless of what the police tell us they're going to do, if they're going to arrest us or not, we're determined to do it. We are hopeful they won't arrest us, but, we are risking arrest, and if we are arrested, we'll very likely be in jail till Monday.
So the possession of marijuana under Initiative 71 is legal, but public display and use is still an arrestable offense?
Public display is legal on D.C. property, and sharing, you can share right in front of a police station, which I've seen people do on numerous occasions, actually, to prove a point. But you can't take marijuana onto federal property, and so we'll be inside of the White House security zone, even though it's technically Pennsylvania Avenue, and that is a D.C. street we'll be standing in. It technically is federal property. Now, the charges will be handed over to the local authorities for use. That's what they really care about. They're not so concerned about people possessing, even in a federal park. If you're walking through, there's not someone checking you as you walk through, because the city has parks everywhere. They're really more interested in someone who's using in public, because that's illegal everywhere in the city. It's an interesting debate over public use, because we can't get any of the national marijuana groups to come to this protest, not even speak at it. And because we've decided to do civil disobedience, and only individual normal chapters, individual patient groups, things like that are coming, but no national groups, no MPP or NORML or ASA or Drug Policy Alliance. And I know the heads of all these groups, and I respect their decision to not do this, but I do think there's a place for civil disobedience. And I think it's time. It's long overdue. We've had a blind spot for the president. 5 million arrests have taken place. And at this point, if we don't start taking over the narrative around this issue, they'll claim that they've ended the war on drugs, and they'll still be arresting 500,000 or more people a year.
Yeah.
So just for marijuana. So I think it's time to let's take control of the narrative before it's too late, before the primaries are over, and really get the president to rethink what he said back in February, which was essentially that he's not going to reschedule before he leaves office. We want him to make some phone calls to DEA and HHS and get the ball rolling, start the rulemaking, publish it, let's get going. He has the authority already to do it. He's always had the authority. Essentially, he has the same policy as Richard Nixon, and I think that's just a tragedy.
We're speaking with Adam Eidinger, who's working on this D.C. Rally that's going on this Saturday. Is there a website people can get more information on this if they weren't writing it all down while we were talking?
Please go to dcmj.org, and all the information is there, dcmj.org.
Yeah.
And the protest this Saturday in front of the White House.
Now, you bring up the need to deschedule marijuana, and there was a news story I just covered where Libertarian presidential candidate Gary Johnson told the Washington Times that he thinks Obama will deschedule before he leaves office. And then the Times reports that in the past, Obama has always punted on this issue, saying that it's a matter for Congress to have to deal with. Can you tell our listeners why that's not the case, why Obama could actually do this on his own?
Okay, so, the Controlled Substances Act has a descheduling process already spelled out in the Act. It's always been there. It's simply a matter of the political will to change it, to say we want to create a new scheduling for this substance because we've, for instance, found out that it is useful in medical applications as medicine. I mean, that alone is a reason to take it out of Schedule 1. So they can do this. It just takes a phone call. It literally takes a phone call. And this is the part where, the president needs to explain to the country why he doesn't have this authority, because it's spelled out in the Act. And, it would be helpful if Congress passed a law that, and Senator Sanders has one, to deschedule. Other members have similar piece of legislation they've put forward. There's a lot of support in Congress right now to change marijuana laws, but I think they need to hear from the people. The people have been too silent recently. We've been waiting, or we've been acting like it's done. It's not done, and that's why we're calling for people to come and participate. You don't have to get arrested. You can come and support it. You don't have to use cannabis to support this protest, and you're not risking arrest by just being there. You're only risking arrest if you use it. So we think that there should be a huge number of people there, and we are hearing from people from at least a dozen states on the East Coast that are coming in, but there's also a very large contingent of people in the D.C. area. I mean, we recently had a conference at the Mayflower that was very affordable. It was like a $15 per ticket kind of thing, and but 2,000 people came, and it was all mostly about activism, less so about the business. And I want the business to prosper. I own a cannabis business. I own a head shop in the city called Capital Hemp, and but it's not about my business. Our business is legal again, thanks to the initiative. It was shut down and raided, and that's kind of what kicked us in the butt to get more political and to change the laws. And but now, I'm really compassionate to people, for instance, who live in federal subsidized housing. I heard you talking earlier about people being denied federal benefits because of testing positive or being known as drug users. We have a very big problem here where we even have medical patients, people with fibromyalgia, who live in subsidized housing. Under their contracts, they can't possess or use cannabis on the premises. If they go outside and use it, they're breaking the law by using it in public, which is an arrestable offense. So as a result, you actually you smell a lot of cannabis around D.C. now on the streets because people are sort of weighing, well, do I lose my house or go to jail for the night? I'll go to jail for the night.
Yeah. So
that's what we have, and we actually had about 140 arrests for marijuana, which was a huge reduction from 5,700 arrests in a typical year. I was in 2011. Last year it was 140. Half of them were people using in public, and the other half were people who had too much weed, more than 2 ounces, or they were selling large quantities of marijuana, and that's still illegal in the city. But our home cultivation and personal possession rights and use rights are phenomenal for the vast majority of cannabis users. And we used to have about 1% of the population going to jail every year for marijuana. It's not happening anymore. It's wonderful.
We're so glad that you managed to get that law changed, and I-71 passed with, what was it, 71% of the majority?
70? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
It exceeded all of our expectations, and it really was a statement of home rule. The people of Washington, D.C. don't have senators and representatives, so we only have the president who represents us. That's another reason why this protest is coming from the local population. President Obama has said he's going to move to Washington, D.C. after he leaves the White House to help his daughters out because they go to school here, and I have a daughter who's 12 who goes to school here, and I've suggested leaving the country to go to New Zealand if Donald Trump wins. And, I understand how fiercely children like to have stability and like to stay in where their friends are. So he's going to do the nice thing for his children, and he's going to stay here for a few more years and rent out or buy a house. And he's going to be like the rest of us. He's going to lose his rights. He's not going to have a person in Congress to represent him. And he'll be able to grow marijuana in his house.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if he wants to be cool and to be welcome into the D.C. community, which is something I'd like to do, I think he ought to, do something about this issue while he's president. I'm so tired of hearing from
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Thank you so much. Sorry we have to cut it off. We're out of time, but Adam Eidinger, thank you. Good luck.
Dr. Dabber, hurry. Its temperature is shooting past 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's burning up.
I'm afraid for this little guy, it's just too late.
What caused the problem?
Only Dr. Dabber can maintain the perfect temperature for a smooth-tasting, slower burn. This standard vaporizer lost all of its health benefits, sending it up in smoke.
So you're telling me that most vapor pens burn so hot they produce smoke, not vapor?
Correct. Keep away from those standard vaporizer pens and turn to Dr. Dabber. Doctor's orders.
Less heat, more flavor.
How high do you like your profit margin? CannabisRadio.com.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer. Or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Tommy Chong is ready to cut through the smoke and change the tone of Tilk Radio.
During Dance with the Stars, I started feeling discomfort. Yeah. And not only that, I was doing these old man smells. And it was kind of embarrassing because, all the Dancing with the Stars cast and crew, they were all young kids. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, this old guy would come along and do one of those silent farts, that you don't know you're doing it. Yeah. And all of a sudden you smell, and everybody go, what the hell smells? And, it was me. And so I'd scurry off to the bathroom, and that's when I knew that there was something wrong.
The Tommy Chong Podcast, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome to my world.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
And one major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant.
Today in the Radical Rant, I want to talk about the upcoming United Nations General Assembly special session and the renewed focus that drug law reform is getting in the mainstream. And I mean drug law reform, not just marijuana law reform. And the piece I'm looking at in the International Business Times opens up with Ethan Nadelmann, who is the head of the Drug Policy Alliance, and as far as I'm concerned, one of the best minds in drug policy reform. And how he's got an issue with marijuana now that the marijuana industry is solely focused or largely focused on its own legality and its own profits. and ignoring the broader cause of drug law reform in general. And it's a case where, even in the case of marijuana law reform, some of these industries aren't too quick to donate back to the drug law reform organizations. Now, Nadelman naturally has a broader perspective because he's the head of the Drug Policy Alliance, which is an umbrella organization for all manner of drug policy reforms. We're talking, needle exchange and recovery and naloxone and prison sentencing reform and a lot of things that have to do with drugs in general. Whereas other groups that are involved in the marijuana movement, which would include Marijuana Policy Project, NORML, those groups are more specifically focused on marijuana. And this is where we're going to see an interesting shift that's going to take place. Because as marijuana becomes legalized, do marijuana reformers then go on to try to reform other drug laws? Or do more marijuana reformers get co-opted into the newly legal industry? Now, I can tell you, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, at least 8 or 9 colleagues I can name who used to be high-profile members of the drug reform organizations, SSDP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, NORML, MPP, DPA, many of them, National Cannabis Industries Association, and so forth, that have now moved on to private positions with consulting firms or with dispensaries, public relations, and so forth. So we have a situation where some of the best activists, some of the most dedicated people are being driven or enticed to join the newly legal market on more of a self-fulfillment basis. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on that. A number of these people are my friends, and as far as I'm concerned, for the people who put their time in as legalization advocates or reform advocates who often got paid very little, if anything, and suffered and worked harder than they'd ever worked in their life, I say good for you if you're able to make a buck in this newly legal marijuana industry. You got no moral qualms with that whatsoever. But there is the practical concern. If the people who are so good at legalizing all leave and join the industry, who's left to keep pushing the ball for legalization for all of the rest of the states? Who's going to legalize Texas? Who's going to legalize Oklahoma? And furthermore, who's going to keep legalizing in the currently legal states? We just heard Adam Eidinger talking about that for Washington, D.C., how they still don't even have legal sales in that district. We still have issues with no home grow in Washington state. So there's still a need for marijuana reform and marijuana legalization activism, even in the legal states. But as we try to transition this, for those of us who are in marijuana law reform because it's an issue of freedom, an issue of liberty, then those freedoms and liberties also must extend to the use of other drugs. I'm not in marijuana legalization because marijuana is the wonder drug that works wonders. As far as I'm concerned, marijuana could be a terrible thing. And that wouldn't matter because I believe we have the right to use it. But what happens is you try to transition from marijuana to the other substances is a lot of the arguments that we've made in marijuana law reform, a lot of the framing that we've used, will be impotent in the fight to reform other drug laws. For example, Marijuana Policy Project, and in particular, Mason Tvert, communications director for MPP, headed up an organization called SAFER. And SAFER did a whole lot to set the framing that got marijuana finally legalized in Colorado. So again, this is not to take pot shots, pardon the pun, at anybody's strategy or tactics. It's just to point out what has happened. And that is this. SAFER promoted this message that marijuana is safer than alcohol. And this was generated by the people at MPP and SAFER doing extensive polling that found out that when people didn't know marijuana was safer than alcohol, if they thought they were equal or even if marijuana was worse, those people overwhelmingly did not support legalization. But people who did think that marijuana was safer than alcohol, overwhelmingly supported legalization. So they believed that the key was the more of the people you could convert, that you could educate into understanding that marijuana is safer than alcohol, the more likely you'd pass legalization, and it would appear that hypothesis was proven correct. They managed to prove that marijuana is safer than alcohol. We've got more than half of the people in America who believe it, even the president, who believe it's at least no more harmful than alcohol. That's the least you can say, man. It's far less harmful than alcohol, but still, no more harmful will do for now. And that change of attitudes helps to change the law for marijuana. Well, what happens when you have to apply that to cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin? It's a little harder to make that argument that, well, heroin's safer than alcohol. Well, not really. They're both pretty devastating drugs. Marijuana is safer than cocaine is safer than alcohol. Well, no, they're both pretty damn addictive, right? So you can't use that same framing. Another frame that fails when we apply it to other drugs is the tax revenue frame. We'll legalize marijuana, we'll raise taxes off marijuana, we'll tax and regulate, and we'll have all this tax money from marijuana. And sure, because a lot of people use marijuana. And those people that use it over a long period of time of their life. People that are on the hard drugs, first of all, there's not that many of them. And second of all, if they're lucky, they don't use it over a long, continuous period of their life. It's a phase they go through, right? And third, if you were going to build a market, you wouldn't want to build a market for hard drugs that had to depend on people continuously using them. I mean, that's the market we've got for alcohol. We don't want to apply that to cocaine, meth, or heroin. So the tax revenue argument doesn't work very well with legalizing other drugs either. There wouldn't be enough to raise, and the Sabat conjecture would actually kick in. The Sabat conjecture is when Kevin Sabat used to say, well, legalizing marijuana wouldn't be a good tax revenue enhancer because alcohol and tobacco only raise 1/10 in taxes what they cost to society. For every $1 we raise in alcohol and tobacco taxes, they cost $10 in wrecks and emphysema and cancer and all the things that alcohol and tobacco cause, which is a fallacy because, of course, alcohol and tobacco are toxic and addictive, and cannabis is not. But cocaine is. Heroin is, meth is, those things are toxic and addictive. So the Sabat conjecture might actually work with respect to legalizing those other drugs. You could say, yeah, we could legalize cocaine and tax it, but for every dollar we'd raise in cocaine taxes, we'd lose $5 in addiction or $10, whatever the figure is. So we can't use the safer argument. We can't use the tax and regulate argument. The only argument that works well for all drug legalization is the harm reduction argument. It's the argument that says that, look, here's a substance and it can have some pretty harmful effects. Heroin can make you a junkie, and, cocaine can empty your bank account, and, speed can rot your face, right? All these terrible things that could happen. But making them illegal and letting criminals control the market makes all those things worse. And that's where drug reform has to go. If you're a marijuana reformer, maybe it's time to start applying that lesson to marijuana. Instead of framing it as safer than alcohol and tax revenue, which it is, but try to start steering the conversation to, even if marijuana was as bad as alcohol, it should be legal because alcohol's legal. Because we figured out, even when a drug is bad, making it illegal makes it worse. I often point out that we already legalized alcohol, and compared to heroin, coke, meth, and I got them all, heroin, coke, and meth. Compared to those three drugs, alcohol is as dangerous or worse in some respects. So if we figured out that the most harmful drug used by the most number of people was more harmful when it was illegal than when it's legal, then that principle should apply to the other hard drugs. And legalization of other hard drugs does not mean that they have to be available at dispensaries like we do with marijuana. They could be just medical only, nonprofits, maintenance doses. There's all sorts of ways this can be handled. But I think it's important for those of us as marijuana reformers to make sure that we're not making things. I'm not saying you have to be a drug reformer. Maybe marijuana is the only one you want to deal with. Maybe that's the only one morally you feel is right to defend. That's fine. But let's not make things harder for the people that are trying to help people with serious drug addictions. It's all the time we got for Hour 1, but stay tuned. Hour 2 is next with your calls at 971-533-7111. For everyone here at CannabisRadio.com, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at RadicalRuss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.